like show you a number of the things that we do at Rights Info. We're an odd little journalism charity in London, in the UK. We talk about human rights. We write stories about human rights. There's 5 in my team. I don't have campaign managers. I've got journalists and video makers. So I'm going to show you a few films that we have been making and talk a bit about our history and kind of like what we are up to. I feel a bit of a fraud because there's not going to be any VR in this. We don't do that yet, although that's super interesting. So we do a number of things. Does that? It's doing something. Oh, okay. So Rights Info was put together by a barrister, a human rights barrister, Adam Wagner. Started off as a blog, and then he moved on to working with different agencies. And that's one thing that we are really immersive with, is that we work quite a lot with external people in a way that I've never done in the third sector before. So yes, Adam did start out working with external groups. He worked with lawyers who wrote a lot of the blogs for us to do explainers around human rights, to make them more accessible to people. He also worked with infographics. So we do have some extremely beautiful, expensive infographics that Information is Beautiful made for us. But they're kind of out of date. So one of the reasons we don't use them a lot at the moment is because they're quite hard to kind of like update. I'm looking for different projects with different tech teams to help us do some really interesting stuff about updating them in live time, so that, you know, that kind of stuff. But we haven't completely got rid of them, but they're just quite expensive to maintain. We also worked with agencies externally, who, like Cubbit Studio, who made one of our first animations, which should play now.
Human rights. What are human rights? Well, human rights are the values which keep society fair, just and equal. They protect children, the elderly, people in care, victims of domestic violence, people with mental health problems, religious groups, teachers, soldiers, and yes, prisoners. They protect all of us. They protect you. Our human rights are protected by law. That means we can do something if our rights are attacked. But not everyone loves human rights. Some want to water them down, even scrap them. Our rights are under threat, so it's time to get educated.
So that was a really early animation, which really helped us. We did a lot of work on Facebook. It went viral. We had hundreds of thousands of views. Adam did a lot of paid kind of like engagement. So we had the numbers, and we had those kind of like vanity metrics. Sometimes the numbers, though, are not always kind of like the way to go. A lot of that engagement is outside of the UK, so like that's not bad. But if we're a UK-based charity and we're trying to talk about UK-based stuff, for us to get a lot of engagement in the US, I'm not entirely sure what we're doing with that. I'm not saying that we can't do something with it, but those kind of vanity metrics then become a bit difficult. So, like, one of the things we've also tried to do is look at impact in different kinds of ways. So, like, one of the things that's amazing about like having a tiny team and being a journalist operation, and we try and put out at least 3 stories a day about human rights. So we're fast moving, but we can get really agile with that. So this film was made in the wake of the Charlottesville marches, and we saw an opportunity to launch a crowdfunding campaign. We've done one since. It has not been successful. This was successful because it was in the moment, and a number of sort of like people really kind of like raced at it. So this is called the warning signs.
There were definitely warning signs there, but I don't think they were so much ignored as denied.
Something serious was building up, but never thought that it was going to be horrible as it turned out to be.
History can teach us so much, but we keep ignoring history lessons at our own peril all the time.
So that film, again, was picked up by Upworthy. It was kind of pushed in the States. We got another bunch of like really good sort of like metrics on it. It was also picked up by people like the Victoria Derbyshire show, so we got a lot of engagement. These are survivors from 3 genocides who went on the show to talk about their experience. So this kind of content is a very specific kind of content and can kind of like appeal to a lot of people. The sector looks very much at sort of like the movable middle a lot. What we try, and I brought an agency in to talk to us about how we might think about appealing to everybody. Like, if we're only going to appeal to 10%, human rights are supposed to be universal, you know, we're not going to always hit it, and we understand that, but what we kind of like are trying to do is look at different kinds of content. Not everyone's going to look at all our content, but we're trying to kind of like use content that might get picked up. Like, we're trying to kind of like inspire people to think again about human rights, and within the team, we're constantly going, how would we do this? How would we get the Daily Mail to pick up a story? What's the kind of content that they would kind of like go for? So this content was quite, you know, when we looked at engagement, it wasn't getting the kind of really negative stuff that some of our other things get. And we're not worried about other things getting difficult, kind of like, because a lot of the stuff is difficult. It is political, you know, and we're going to get political kind of responses. So this is one that gave us quite a lot of political responses. This is a piece of animation work that we did around sex worker rights, which is one of the most controversial stuff on our books at the moment. We tried to kind of like look at it in a slightly different way. So we used some research whereby the English Collective Prostitutes had like talked to a number of different kinds of like women's working kind of like arenas in order to compare and contrast issues. And I did it as a watercolour with a like very traditional animation. This is hand-drawn, hand-painted. There's 7,000 images and drawings in this piece of work, and we use the lived experiences of women kind of like in that research to voice the animation.
I'm a midwife. A lot of us work part-time and make do with having less money in order to do midwifery because it's so stressful. There's a saying, midwives' working conditions are women's birthing conditions. If it's not good for us, it's not good for the people we're caring for. You're on your feet probably 11 hours at a time.
Back in 2012, I got arrested for brothel keeping because I was working with other women. The only way to legally work is to work by yourself, which is obviously a lot more dangerous. In 2012, they raided lots of premises trying to clean up the city for the Olympics, and all they did was displace lots of workers. Because I got a criminal record, I couldn't work with children anymore, I couldn't work with vulnerable people, I couldn't work in care homes because they all require DBS checks. So basically, what was a little job that helped me pay back the debts I got from drama school turned into a full-time career.
So that content's quite contentious, but we've already been told about how this has been spread in different kinds of ways. We were saying there's no point about the message if it doesn't spread. But I've got feedback from women's groups and the TUC, kind of like in relation to some of their officers, that they've already been using this to start conversations, to sort of like have step-off points. So we're interested in looking at impact in different kinds of ways, not just the big numbers. And like we've already got this into into an animation festival, film festival. So it's kind of like spreading in different kinds of ways. I love using animation. I was at the RSA, used to work in their media team and with their animation team. So this animator was somebody that worked at the RSA who did an animation with Brené Brown, which got, I don't know how many millions of views. This didn't get quite as many, but we did this story. It's a positive story about human rights in the NHS. It was for the birthday of the NHS. We spoke to a doctor around her experience of like using human rights in hospitals, and like we wanted to show that human rights aren't always litigious. They're kind of like there to protect everybody. So it's like an optimistic, connecting story.
My name's Sarah Fans, I'm a junior doctor, so I am particularly interested in emergency medicine and global health. Probably the one thing that we see in a very high acuity environment is kind of that life and death balance, in the sense that you see all spectrums of life. So you'll see a 2-day-old newborn baby who perhaps a little bit jaundiced, and you'll see a 103-year-old who has really just reached up for that last packet of Jack cakes and taken a bit of tumble. I realised that we have this legal framework to back up all these things that you take for granted without realising it a lot of the time. The right to life will always be one that is forever paramount in healthcare. People will have different needs and they'll have different requirements, so what's relevant to one person won't be relevant to another person. So to have a net and to know that you're doing right by those patients is really important. When you go into hospital, when you're first admitted, whether it's for something like a broken leg or a worsening chest infection, they say, who's your next of kin? Which equates to, if things happen, who do you want to know? Is it your mum? Is it your partner? Is it your brother? And that's completely respecting your right to privacy, and that's your family, and that's you being empowered to have that responsibility for your own decision in that respect. And that's done at the door, so it doesn't matter how things go further down the line, that's first and foremost. Equally, you're asked about your religion, you're asked about your dietary requirements, if there's anything in particular to know.
Can't remember what comes next. Okay. So, so the other thing that we're kind of like really interested in doing is not just working with agencies, is when we kind of like get involved with projects, how we amplify with partnerships and what comes out of them, sometimes unexpectedly. So I'm kind of leaving the film itself to the end, but we did a film, I was commissioned by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission to make a film about accessibility, to getting the story of human rights a bit more accessible. And I did a project around, a bit like the Secret Life of Kids, where we spoke to children under 9 about human rights. During that project, I worked with UNICEF's Rights Respecting Schools, and it kind of like inspired me to think about where we might go for older children and what Rights Respecting Schools might do for older children, which is now kind of like, we're now working on this project, which is our first sort of half an hour documentary. Usually we work with 2 or 3 minutes of film. This one's a bit longer. It's a school exclusions project in the UK, and it's only going to feature young people. So like the film itself is only going to hear from the experiences and voices of young people without adults kind of like speaking in front of them or for them. And that came out of the Fair Play video, which I'm just about to show. So there's 2 more girls that we spoke to. Oh. Yeah, play the video. It's bouncing back and forth. So this is the last thing that I'm going to be showing, is just this video as a bit of a cute end. Oh. Leave the clicker. Fair Play? Yeah.
I'm trying to find one that's still playing hard.
Sorry.
I'm trying to find one that's still playing hard.
I don't know.
I want to be an artist, a teacher, a footballer. If you don't learn at school, and when you're a grown up, you won't know anything. And we're like doing education right now. You should be listening to what somebody has said. Change. Being able to get a point across that. We have to listen to them and they have to listen to us. Certain people are treated differently just because their beliefs. That is absolutely not kind.
You can't wear blue because you're a girl.
Yes, you should. Because in the olden days, only men could vote and everyone thought that was quite unfair.
We vote for the school prime minister who makes all the things happen around in the school.
I read that all the elections have. This is like what the whole thing's about. You don't just want them, you need them.
It's mostly about being there.
The head teacher, Mrs. Lee, everybody.
Basically all of us, children and adults, so we can know about them and that can help us and we can ask for help if we need it.
Our teachers, us, our friends. If it wasn't for rates,